The lobby of Sterling Federal Bank exploded with a sentence sharp enough to slice the air. Remove her immediately. We do not let black women touch money that is not theirs. Mark Ellison, the 45-year-old branch manager, spoke loudly enough for the entire bank to hear, as if he wanted his humiliation of her carved into every brick beneath their feet. Every gaze converged on a single point where Danielle Brooks stood graceful and quiet in the middle of a circle of prejudice. The thin black laptop case resting against her hip seemed like the only thing she could hold on to. But in truth, the only thing that did not tremble was her eyes. The bank lobby buzzed with noise whispers like tiny needles piercing bone. She probably just found that card, another fake VIP. Look at how she is dressed. A young mother pushing a stroller froze, unable to believe her ears. A middle-aged man in a grey suit smirked as if enjoying free entertainment. This place should have been an ordinary scene lights reflecting off polished brass, the steady hum of the money counter, the faint scent of weak coffee in the air. But Mark's words had transformed it into a courtroom where Danielle was being judged not by law, but by skin color and modest appearance. Danielle, 39, stood tall. Her heart pounded hard, but didn't break. She had lived through harsher moments, times when people erased her worth with a sentence, a look, a decision. At 24, she had been denied a loan, even after placing a deposit, triple the required amount. At 30, she had been told to her face she did not fit the image of a corporate client. The old scars were still there, but they were what kept her steady in the storm now crashing over her. Ryan Cole, the 32-year-old security guard, stepped forward, his shoes hitting the floor with heavy thuds. His hand trembled slightly as it touched his radio. He knew this order was wrong. He saw the injustice clearly, but he also knew how terrifying the name Mark Ellison was inside this building. Danielle looked at Ryan, her eyes holding no blame, no fear, only a strange calm that stopped him mid-step. Mark slammed Danielle's bank card onto the counter. The sound was loud, too loud, like a slap across her dignity. You have no right to claim you have millions in this account. He barked with smug confidence, certain he had already won. A teller snickered. Another whispered, "People like that always pull these stunts." Danielle felt her body tighten, each word wrapped around her chest like steel wires, but she still did not speak. Her silence was not weakness. It was a weapon, one sharp enough to slow the entire lobby to the rhythm of her breathing. Jamal Thompson, the 22-year-old black man at the end of the line, lifted his phone and hit record. "They are doing it again," he said softly, voice tight with the familiar sting of helplessness. Beside him, a Latina woman, cradling her baby, whispered angrily. "She has not even said a word, and they already decided she is guilty." But those small voices were not enough to stop Mark. He spun toward Ryan and barked, "Call the police now." Those words, icy and heartless, sent a shiver through the room. Danielle placed her hands on the counter, steady, unflinching. Her palms burned hot, but her heart grew cold and razor-sharp, like a knife freshly honed. Old, painful memories surged back, but instead of dragging her down, they lifted her upright. Every insult, every dismissal, every moment she was treated as an outsider had carved a stone foundation inside her. A strange stillness spread through the lobby. Not peace, but the silence before a storm makes landfall. Danielle could hear Mark's breath, quick and arrogant, Ryan's slow and hesitant, the entire room's uneven, frantic. Then she spoke. not loudly, not shaking. Just a low, controlled tone sharp enough to shift the atmosphere. "Do not touch me." 4 words, short, clear, certain, a blade parting clouds. Ryan froze. Mark's eyes bulged. The entire bank held its breath. And in that thickened air, a thought flashed through Danielle's mind, a thought no one could see, but strong enough to rewrite the fate of everyone present. This will be the last time they ever dare to underestimate me. When Mark screamed, "The police will put cuffs on you right here in this bank," Danielle closed her eyes for a second, letting the old pain settle, then opened them again, sharper, brighter, calmer. She knew she was standing on the razor edge between humiliation and truth. And in just one more moment, the whole world would see who truly belonged here, and who was about to lose everything. The air inside Sterling Federal Bank stretched thin, like a steel wire about to snap, as Danielle slid her hand into her coat pocket, her movement slow, but commanding, each gesture so deliberate it felt choreographed. Every eye locked onto her. Mark Ellison let out a mocking laugh, his voice dripping with sarcasm and a cruel kind of satisfaction. "Oh, and who are you calling now your boyfriend to come rescue you?" But Danielle didn't look at him. She unlocked her phone, the glow from the screen illuminating a face so calm it was terrifying. One tap, one call, one shift that would rewrite the history of this branch. "Begin full recording," Danielle said, her voice steady like the surface of a lake before a storm. On the other end, a composed female voice responded clear and sharp enough to puncture Mark's assumptions. "Activated." All audio and visual feeds are being uploaded to headquarters monitoring system. The entire room froze. The silence this time was not shock, but fear, a creeping cold that spread from employees to customers and swept through the lobby. Eric Dalton, the assistant manager, stepped out of the glass office and stopped dead when he heard that sentence. His expression flickered from arrogance to uncertainty, then to unease. Still, his fragile pride made him snap back with a harsh voice. "You think a few dramatic lines will make us believe you are someone important?" But Danielle saw the slightest tremble in Eric's hand. Ryan, the security guard, heard the word headquarters and felt his legs weaken. He had heard stories about top-level banking systems recording data for high-profile investigations, but had never seen a customer give an order that triggered one. Jamal kept recording his heart pounding. Never in his life had he seen a black woman stand in the middle of a trading floor, stare down blatant power, and remain this calm. He whispered to himself, "She knows exactly what she is doing. Oh my God, she really knows." Mark tried to claw back control. He slammed his hand on the counter, spitting every word. "I do not care what stunt you are pulling. The police are already called. You will be in handcuffs right here." Danielle turned toward him, not smiling, not shaking, simply looking straight through him as if she could see the cracks in his arrogant facade. "I will not be the one in handcuffs today." He burst out laughing, a forced, bitter sound. "She is insane," someone whispered. "Or maybe she is a lawyer," another guessed. "No. She looks like someone with something big behind her." No one knew which guess was right, but the air was shifting. Everyone except Mark could feel it. Then Rachel's voice cut through the speaker again, sharper this time, situation verified. "All data is syncing with the main system. The board of directors has been notified. Live footage is now prioritized." Words like board of directors, main system data sync crashed into Mark and Eric like sledgehammers. Eric turned pale. Mark gripped the counter so tightly his knuckles turned white. A female teller at the side station stepped back, remembering that the system had flagged a special tier VIP file earlier that morning, a file she had been too afraid to open. She looked at Danielle. No, it cannot. But the thought terrified her too much to finish. Mark tried shouting again to drown his fear. Staff security, everyone sees she is impersonating someone. This is a private bank, not a stage for her theatrics. No one moved. They stood frozen. And that silence was the moment Mark should have realized everything was slipping from his hands. But he was not smart enough to see it. Danielle lifted her chin, her voice low but solid as steel. I do not need theatrics. You performed all of this yourselves. One sentence, but it made the entire lobby shudder, because it was true. Everything Mark Eric and their staff had said was being recorded, not by customers' phones, but by the bank's own executive system. A mother holding her toddler near the entrance whispered, "Dear God, this is going too far." An older man clasped his hands behind his back, eyes sharp. She is not ordinary. Look at how she stands, like she is the highest authority in this room. Jamal looked at Danielle, then at Mark, and he felt everything shift. Not because Danielle yelled, not because she fought back, but because she stood still like a storm, waiting for the exact second to strike. Then the moment that shattered the bank in fear arrived. From Danielle's phone, Rachel announced, her voice cold as a blade. Headquarters requests Phase 2 authorization level verification. A loud clatter rang out as a customer dropped a coffee cup. Mark spun around, shouting to deny it. She is tricking you. That is impossible. That cannot be. But the sentence strangled in his throat. Because everyone knew no one could trigger ownership verification without the highest level of access. And only a few people in the entire sterling financial empire had that authority. Danielle looked at Mark, her eyes neither angry nor triumphant, only the calm certainty of someone who already knew exactly what was about to unfold. "Mr. Ellison," she said, "are you prepared for the consequences?" The silence that followed was not ordinary silence. It was the silence of a chandelier about to crash, of glass about to shatter, of a storm already overhead. Then Danielle's phone vibrated once more. A single sentence came through, ending the first act of the storm verification. "Ready. Awaiting your command." And when Danielle raised her head, the entire bank felt as if they were witnessing the beginning of an overthrow they would never forget. The lobby of Sterling Federal Bank felt as if it were holding its breath as Danielle stood there, only seconds away from giving the final command. The eyes that once carried mockery now brimmed with fear, and the curious stares had turned into sharp, unnerving vigilance. Mark Ellison tried to swallow, but his throat was dry as sand sweat sliding down his temples, and his eyes darting around in desperation, searching for an exit that did not exist. Eric Dalton stood beside him, his face pale as paper, his hand unconsciously gripping the pen in his pocket, as if it were the only thing tethering him to a reality, rushing at him like a runaway train. Danielle barely moved, yet everyone in the lobby felt the weight of her stillness, a stillness stretched tight like a violin string on the edge of snapping. Then she lifted her phone, the motion light as breath, yet it shook the entire room. Rachel Danielle said, her voice low, but echoing like thunder inside every mind present initiate verification. 1 beat passed, 2 beats, 3 beats. The customers closest to her felt as if their hearts had dropped to the floor. Then Rachel's voice came through the phone, even sharp, without a trace of excess emotion. "In progress. Connecting to central server. Opening executive access. updated record in 3 seconds. A young employee behind the counter dropped an entire stack of papers. Another teller brought a hand to her mouth. Ryan, the security guard, stepped back half a pace, his eyes widening as though seeing the world under real light for the first time. Jamal glanced around, realizing everyone had turned into living statues, eyes glued to Danielle. Mark tried to shout, clinging to the last bits of authority slipping through his fingers. This is fake. A trick. She is fooling all of you. Do not get swept up in her performance. But the terrifying truth was that no one was listening to him anymore. They stood there waiting like people awaiting the reading of a verdict. A soft bing sounded from Danielle's phone, the sound so small, yet loud enough to make Mark flinch as if a bomb had gone off. Rachel spoke each word, dropping like a stone on polished marble verification. Complete. Returning data from Sterling Holdings' main server. Highest level ownership information, Danielle Brooks, Chief Executive Officer of Brooks Financial Holdings, parent entity of Sterling Federal Bank. Authentication level absolute. A sharp crash echoed across the lobby. No one knew whose glass had fallen, only that it landed at the exact moment the entire room fell into deadly silence. Mark opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Eric stumbled backward until his spine hit the counter. A female employee behind the desk stammered, covering her mouth, her eyes glistening with terror. Danielle stood still, her gaze neither triumphant nor angry. Only the cold clarity of someone far too accustomed to being misjudged, and far too accustomed to proving exactly who she was. A woman in a red blazer whispered, her voice trembling. She owns this bank." An elderly man beside his wife pushed his glasses up his nose, eyes wide. "Not the branch, the entire bank, dear Lord," Jamal gasped, hardly believing what he had just heard. She is really the CEO. I am watching history happen right in front of me." Danielle lowered the phone and looked directly at Mark, the man who only minutes earlier believed he held absolute power. "Mr. Ellison," she said calmly, almost chillingly, "you convicted me before you even knew my name. You called me a fraud inside a bank I own." Mark trembled. He forced a broken smile, clinging to the faint hope he could still salvage something. I did not know you misunderstood I." But he could not finish. Every word dragged another chunk of authority out of him, and he knew that the more he spoke, the deeper he sank. Eric tried to step forward to reclaim some ground, but his knees buckled. We were just following procedure." Danielle turned to him, her voice slicing through excuses. "Based on what procedure? The procedure of judging customers by their clothes. The procedure of disguising discrimination as security." Eric's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. A female teller, the one who had mocked Danielle earlier, suddenly began to cry softly. I did not know who you were." Danielle smiled faintly, but the smile carried a deep sadness. "You do not need to know who I am to treat me with respect." Every word landed heavy on the chests of those who stood there. Ryan, the young guard, stepped forward, his voice shaking but sincere. "Ma'am, I am sorry. I knew this was wrong. I should have stopped them." Danielle looked at him, her gaze softening. "Thank you for at least recognizing it." Then she turned to the rest of the room. "You have all seen," she said, her voice clear, strong, without needing to shout, "a black woman walk into a bank she owns only to be treated like a criminal," before she spoke a single word. Many looked down. Some exhaled in shame. The young mother holding her baby whispered, "I will never forget this." And Mark. He stuttered in sheer desperation. You cannot fire me over a misunderstanding. I have served this bank for 17 years. Danielle looked at him, her eyes slicing through all 17 of those years. And not once have you learned respect. His body sagged, as if the sentence drained the very life out of him. Rachel's voice returned through the phone. Headquarters awaiting next command. Ready for processing. Danielle held the phone firmly. The lobby went silent. Everyone knew the next command would determine the fate of every person who had humiliated her. And under the white lights of the bank, Danielle's face glowed like a verdict, already signed, without needing to be read aloud. Then she spoke just 3 words, but they shook Sterling Federal Bank to its core. Proceed with processing. Computer screens began to flicker. Something irreversible was about to unfold, and everyone knew they were witnessing the greatest reckoning this bank had ever seen. The screens inside Sterling Federal Bank flared to life all at once, as if awakened by an invisible command. Lines of red text streamed across every interface. Deep warning tones rumbled from the devices, creating a grim symphony of collapse that no one in the management chain had ever imagined they would hear in their lifetime. The air thickened as though it were about to shatter. Employees stood frozen in disbelief. Customers stared at the flickering screens, as if witnessing history unfold before their eyes. Rachel's voice came through the phone, cold and precise, like a blade, revoking access for 3 management accounts, Mark Ellison branch level, Eric Dalton assistant level, Thomas Grant regional supervisor level, confirming execution. A tiny beep came from Mark's computer, sharp enough to make him jerk back in panic. His screen went black before flashing a glowing line of red access denied, corporate lockout. His hand trembled violently as he clutched the edge of the counter like a man hanging over a cliff. He tried to log in again, typing each character with desperate care, but the result came back like a final sentence. Credentials revoked. Eric stood completely still. The monitor in front of him flickered, then shut off, replaced by a massive lock symbol. Cold sweat soaked through his shirt. His throat went dry and he stepped backward inch by inch, as though trying to disappear into the wall. Thomas Grant, who had once strutted through the branch like he owned it, froze as his work phone beeped over and over again. He unlocked the screen only to see the words no senior leader ever wants to face. Your access has been terminated by executive authority. His face flushed red, then drained to white, then faded to grey in the span of 3 seconds. His entire 25-year career wiped out by a command from the very woman he had called a fraud. Danielle did not speak as she watched the collapse unfold. Her face remained calm, composed as if everything happening was simply the natural order, restoring itself. She did not need to raise her voice. Real power does not shout. It stands still and lets truth illuminate itself. Jamal covered his mouth, his eyes wide, his heart pounding so loudly he could hear it echo inside his ears. He swung his phone toward Mark, recording the moment the man crumpled into his chair, eyes glazed, lips trembling like a child caught in the act. "Oh my God," a woman whispered, clutching her child as if afraid the storm of authority might swallow them too. An elderly man murmured, "I have never seen anything like this. A customer. No, the owner standing here, dismantling the entire structure in front of us." Mark tried to gather what little dignity he had left, looking at Danielle with a pleading mixture of fear and shame. "Miss Brooks, please let me explain. I was only doing my job. I never meant to offend." Danielle looked at him, her eyes cold as frost, not cruel, but mercilessly honest. You called me a criminal. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You refused to perform basic verification. You turned discrimination into procedure and justified it with authority. Now tell me, what exactly do you think you can explain? Each word from Danielle fell like a stone, smashing the last bridge Mark hoped to cling to. He opened his mouth, but the only thing that came out were broken, sinking sounds, like someone drowning. Eric tried to speak, his voice shaking as though he were about to cry. We truly did not know who you were. Danielle answered instantly, her tone not raised but sharp enough to make Eric step back half a pace. You do not need to know who I am to treat me properly. The entire lobby fell silent. A teller behind the counter bowed her head, too ashamed to lift her eyes. Ryan, the young guard, stepped forward. He swallowed hard before speaking, his voice trembling but sincere. I am sorry, Miss Brooks. I knew they were wrong, but I did not intervene. I should have stood up for you. Danielle looked at him with the kindest expression she had worn all day. You paused. That is more than many people here did. Ryan bowed deeply, as though receiving a chance at redemption he never expected. Thomas Grant, his face red as a boiled shrimp, made one final attempt to salvage authority. You cannot do this without the board's approval. Danielle turned to him, her eyes glowing with stillness. She lifted her phone so Thomas could hear Rachel's voice clearly. The board has received the live recording. Processing authority now belongs to the Chief Executive Officer. All decisions made by Miss Brooks at this moment are immediately binding. Thomas stood frozen, the fear in his eyes no longer hidden. It cracked across his face like a fracture in reinforced glass. Danielle lowered the phone and stood straight, her voice light as wind, yet carrying the weight of a collapsing building. Mr. Grant, you used your position to harm customers, to undermine the values of this bank. I do not need the police. I only need one command. She paused for a single beat, and that command has already been executed. The customers began to applaud, not the polite kind, but the explosive kind born of long-held outrage, finally released. A cleansing of power, a reclaiming of justice, a storm reversing its direction. Mark slumped deeper into his chair. Eric leaned against the wall, legs too weak to hold him. Thomas stood, rigid eyes wide, staring at Danielle, as if facing a force he had never known how to confront. Danielle picked up her card from the counter, the same card Mark had slammed down as if it were counterfeit. She held it between two fingers and turned it slightly. This card, she said, her voice low, is a power you never saw, because you only looked at appearances. Then she slipped the card into her coat pocket, a soft gesture that felt like the quiet closing of the final door to the past. Danielle turned toward the customers, who now looked at her with genuine respect. She gave them a small nod, then walked toward the exit. Each step echoed on the marble floor like the rhythm of a victory anthem. No need to look back. No need to say more. The truth had already spoken for her. And as the glass doors slid open, letting sunlight flood the lobby, everyone understood. The people who once believed they held absolute power had just been defeated in the very place they thought they ruled. But now, all of them knew exactly who had walked in, with the only authority that truly mattered. Danielle Brooks, the woman they tried to cast out, was the one standing at the top of the entire system. And today, she made them kneel before that truth. When the automatic doors closed behind Danielle Brooks, the lobby of Sterling Federal Bank fell silent, as if it had just witnessed an earthquake whose aftershocks would stretch on for months, for years, perhaps for the rest of the lives of the people who had just been stripped of their power right before everyone's eyes. But Danielle did not walk away like a triumphant conqueror, not arrogant, not gloating, not even glancing back at the management team collapsing behind her. She walked like someone who knew all too well the pain of being underestimated, disrespected, erased. And now that the truth had finally been laid bare, she chose to move forward with a calmness heavy with meaning. Inside the bank, those who had been fired no longer tried to cling to dignity. Mark Ellison slumped into his chair like a man who had lost all breath, his hands over his face, as if trying to hide the humiliation laid open for the world to see. Eric Dalton leaned against the wall, struggling to breathe, watching Danielle's silhouette with a mix of fear and panic. Thomas Grant, the man who believed himself untouchable, stood stiff and shaking, knowing that even the smallest investigation now would be enough to uncover the dozens of violations he had buried under the excuse of internal procedures. Outside the glass doors, where midday sunlight poured down like a new light onto her life, Danielle paused for a moment, not in hesitation, but because she could feel dozens of eyes following her. Customers spilled out after her, some calling her name with trembling voices filled with emotion. "Miss Brooks, we want to thank you." Danielle turned her eyes, softening slightly, when she saw Jamal running toward her, breath unsteady with adrenaline. "You changed my whole life today," he said, his voice shaking hands, gripping the phone still recording. "I have never seen anyone stand up like that, anyone who dared to fight back against a system like this without fear." Danielle gave him a faint smile, a sad smile, the smile of someone who understood that standing up had never been easy. "It is not that I am not afraid," she replied. "It is that some things are worth facing fear for." A Latina woman holding a baby stepped forward, voice trembling. "Thank you, you showed us we can demand respect. I will teach my child that." Danielle looked at the child, her expression softening even more. "Then your child will grow up in a better world if we fix what is broken," she said. Her words brought tears to more than one person's eyes. An elderly man stepped forward and bowed his head, not out of worship, but out of genuine respect. "I apologize for the generation that created men like Mark. I hope what you did today forces people like him to finally open their eyes." Danielle placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a gesture that said the apology belonged not only to her, but to everyone who had ever suffered what she had endured. Inside Ryan, the young security guard stood behind the glass, watching her, as if watching a symbol he would never forget. He had witnessed managers yelling and customers being mistreated many times before, but he had never seen anyone make him want to change the system the way Danielle did when she stood unshaken against the entire hierarchy. Danielle took another step when the voice on her phone speaker returned. Rachel spoke with professional precision, but beneath it, a deep respect was impossible to hide. Miss Brooks' headquarters requests transition to Step 3, internal statement, and deployment of the replacement leadership team. They are awaiting your instruction. Danielle paused, lifted her gaze to the cloudy but sunlit Seattle sky. "Rachel," she said, her voice, light but firm, "send the statement. State the exact reasons for the terminations. Emphasize the company's zero tolerance for any form of discrimination. And deploy the temporary leadership board to the Seattle branch this afternoon. I want the branch operating normally again, but in a clean and transparent environment." "Understood," Rachel replied. The people around her heard it, and knew instantly Danielle had not come here only to overthrow, she had come to rebuild. Inside the bank, Mark stumbled toward the door, but froze when he met Danielle's eyes. "Miss Brooks," he called, his voice pleading, desperate. No longer the arrogant man from earlier. I have a family. I will lose everything. Please, please reconsider." Danielle looked at him for several seconds, not out of pity, but to remind herself of the younger version of her who had once been rejected, humiliated, erased because of the color of her skin. She drew a slow breath. "I did not take anything from you that you did not destroy yourself," she said clearly. "You insulted me. You insulted people who looked like me. You created this outcome. Not me. If I stayed silent, someone else would suffer in my place." Mark collapsed at the doorway, whispering meaningless pleas that the wind carried away. No one in the crowd looked at him with sympathy, because they all understood that some lessons require complete collapse for a person to understand how deeply they have been wrong. Danielle stepped away from the building, the sunlight catching her hair and her face, highlighting the powerful calm of someone who had been trampled, yet still stood tall in the way only truly strong people could. People on the street stopped because of the gathering crowd. They did not know the story, but they saw a woman walking the way someone walks after reclaiming herself. Jamal hurried after her, asking, "Do you want me to post the video I recorded? It could help people like you, like us." Danielle looked directly into the camera. He held her eyes bright like fire. "Post it. The world needs to see the truth." In that moment, Jamal knew he was holding more than a video. He was holding a spark that would spread everywhere. As Danielle descended the marble steps, Ryan stepped out of the bank behind her, standing straight. "Miss Brooks, if you need protection for this branch, I want to be the first to volunteer." Danielle smiled gently. "I do not need someone to protect me. I need someone to protect the right values." Ryan nodded his face, setting into a seriousness that showed he understood the weight of the responsibility. Danielle turned one last time toward the bank, the building that had rejected her, humiliated her, and been brought down by truth. She didn't feel hatred. She only saw that everything had finally returned to its rightful place. And as she walked away, the wind brushed against the glass, and everyone watching understood the woman they once doubted, mocked, dismissed, had just rewritten the definition of power without raising her voice once. She was not just a chief executive officer. She was proof that those once underestimated can become the strongest storm. And today, the entire city of Seattle would remember the storm named Danielle Brooks. News of Danielle Brooks firing the entire management team of Sterling Federal Bank spread faster than traffic on Seattle's rush-hour streets. Not even 10 minutes after she left the branch, social media erupted with thousands of comments, posts, and customer videos from inside the lobby. Most explosive of all was Jamal's video, posted only 3 minutes earlier, already hitting 2 million views. The image of Danielle standing tall, silent yet sharp as steel in the middle of a storm of prejudice, became a symbol of hope and a thunderous slap to those who believed power was a coat that could never be stripped away. In the car, Danielle sat in the back seat, leaning gently against the cushion as Rachel delivered the report. "Miss Brooks, we are now the top national trend. Major news outlets are requesting interviews, and the legal department says 7 old complaints about Mark and Eric surfaced within the past hour. Customers said they had experienced similar treatment, but no one believed them." Danielle closed her eyes, taking in everything, as though her heart needed a moment to synchronize the past and the present. It was not triumph. not pride. But the heavy weight of a truth. How many people had endured what she had just faced? How many had been dismissed, insulted, degraded because of their appearance? Without a single voice standing up for them, Rachel continued. Headquarters requests your direct approval on the new anti-discrimination commitment. They say your story is proof of why the policy must be enforced strictly. Danielle opened her eyes, looking out the car window at Seattle's towering buildings reflecting the late afternoon sun. Good, she said softly. If they want change, I will see it through. The car stopped in front of a tall glass building, the Western Regional Headquarters of Brooks Financial Holdings. Employees lined the lobby, nervous at the unexpected arrival of the corporation's chief executive officer. A manager named Linda hurried toward her, her face draining of color when she saw Danielle's expression, a calm, yet razor-sharp composure forged only by real storms. Miss Brooks, we saw the announcement from the Seattle branch. We fully support your decision, and we apologize for letting this situation exist. Danielle did not blame or scold. I do not need an apology. I need a plan for change, she said as she entered the main conference room. All regional leaders were present. The atmosphere felt stripped of oxygen as Danielle placed her laptop case on the table. She opened it, and the screen's glow washed over her face, freezing the entire room. I want every branch in this region to review their customer reception procedures, Danielle said. Not on paper, but in real practice. Nervous glances darted between the executives. A regional director named Michael spoke carefully. Miss Brooks. Such a review will take significant time and cost. Danielle looked at him directly. The cost of disrespect is greater. Michael fell silent, unable to argue. Rachel's voice echoed through the speaker. Miss Brooks, several civil rights organizations are requesting direct dialogue with you. They want to partner in turning today's event into a campaign for fairness in financial services. Danielle exhaled slowly. I am not turning this into a campaign, but I will not let it disappear quietly. Meanwhile, Jamal's video continued to spread. News stations labeled it the Seattle Bank standoff. They analyzed every glance, every word, every reaction from Danielle. Short clips circulated with captions like, "This is what real strength looks like. This is why no one should be judged by appearance. This is a chief executive officer." On the other side, Mark Ellison sat in a small back room of the branch separated from the customer area. He curled into himself like a child who had committed an unforgivable mistake, holding his head in both hands, breath unsteady. His phone rang non-stop, his wife, former regional supervisors, colleagues from other states, asking what had happened. He could not answer. He knew that if he spoke, his career would not only end, it would become a cautionary example, cited in training seminars for years. Eric Dalton lay collapsed in a chair, clutching his forehead in panic. He knew today's videos would follow him forever. A female employee who had mocked Danielle sobbed in the restroom, guilt tightening around her chest. But amidst all the chaos, Ryan, the young security guard, became the internet's most unexpected hero. In the video, he was the first to stop following the wrongful order. Comments poured in, praising him. He saw injustice and refused to stay silent. We need more people like him. I hope the bank keeps him. And from headquarters, Danielle had already made that decision. Rachel, she said, note this. Ryan Cole recommend retention and promotion. Rachel nodded, documenting it immediately. When the meeting ended, Danielle stood alone in the empty conference room. A cold breeze slipped through the door crack, carrying the chill of the coastal city. She looked at the tall buildings outside, each one a story, a system, an injustice, perhaps never uncovered. She thought of herself at 24, the woman standing at a teller window with a denied loan application, her heart crushed by the words, "You do not fit our client image." Back then, she had wanted to disappear into silence. But today she was here no longer silent. Her phone buzzed. It was Jamal sending the video that had crossed 10 million views, along with a message, "Thank you for fighting for all of us." Danielle watched the video for a few seconds, then let the screen fade. Not because she wanted to forget, but because she needed space to think deeper. How many places like Sterling, Seattle still existed? How many people like Mark still held power? How many people like her younger self were standing alone in a crowd of judgment? She inhaled slowly. The wind outside picked up cold, but clarifying. Today's battle was not over. It had only begun. And for the first time in many years, Danielle felt strong enough to face the world, not because she was a chief executive officer, but because she had stood up at the exact moment people expected her to stay silent. Today she had lit a spark, and she knew it would spread far beyond the glass walls of a small Seattle bank. As Danielle left the conference room, her expression composed, but her eyes burning bright, everyone understood one thing. Clearly, she did not come to fix a single branch. She came to change the entire system, and the system was trembling. That evening, as the city of Seattle sank into the warm yellow glow stretching across its streets, the headquarters of Brooks Financial Holdings shone brightly like a lighthouse in the dark. On the top floor in the executive office, overlooking Elliott Bay, Danielle Brooks sat motionless in front of a screen, displaying dozens of new reports. Each report was a testimony from employees, customers, even former staff who had left Sterling Federal Bank, and all of them read like they had been written from the same template. They had been belittled, judged, and discriminated against by the people in power. Danielle's breath tightened in her throat, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of the truth laid bare before her. The 3 managers fired today were only the tip of a massive, dark iceberg. Beneath it were hundreds of unrecorded violations, thousands of customers harmed, without a single person stepping forward to defend them. Worse still was the silence of the system, a silence that had allowed the darkness to grow. She wondered if she had not walked into that branch today, would any of this ever have come to light? The answer was no. And that truth pressed heavily on her chest. Rachel stepped in, eyes filled with concern and respect. "Miss Brooks, the other regional directors are requesting an emergency meeting in 30 minutes, she said. "They want to hear your plan. The company is under heavy pressure from both the media and shareholders." Danielle nodded. "Tell them I will attend." Rachel left the room, and Danielle was left with her thoughts and the thick silence hanging like a dark curtain. Pressure had never frightened her. Responsibility was different. The responsibility of a leader was not steering the ship when the sea was calm, but keeping it afloat when storms came from all directions. And tonight, the storm was closing in fast. Her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number read, "Thank you. I used to work for Sterling. I was fired for refusing to take part in discriminatory practices. Today, because of you, I feel like I was not meaningless." Danielle held the phone a little tighter. Each message felt like a needle, piercing old wounds, but also like a spark, fueling her determination to keep fighting. The emergency meeting began on time. Regional directors appeared on the large screen, their faces framed in video call windows. Some looked angry, some anxious, others clearly worried about being implicated. Michael, the Northeast director, spoke first, his voice tight with tension. "Miss Brooks, the situation is out of control. We have received over 50 new reports in just a few hours. Branches are being audited non-stop, and the media is calling us the prime example of systemic discrimination in the banking industry." Danielle was not offended. She looked calmly into the camera, her eyes bright yet steady. "And that is not something we should hide from. It is something we must fix." Another director cut in, "But this will cause the stock to drop. It will severely damage customer trust." Danielle responded immediately, her voice low but sharp. "Trust is not damaged by the truth. Trust is damaged by hiding the truth." Silence fell. The sentence hit every video window like a splash of ice water. Michael looked down and exhaled slowly. "So what is your plan?" Every face on the screen turned toward Danielle. She gently placed her hand on the table, as if placing the bank's future there. "We are not patching cracks," she said. "We are rebuilding the structure. I am forming a new transparency council under the CEO's office. Every branch must submit a monthly workplace environment review. All complaints will be monitored directly by an independent investigative team." An older director frowned. "That is essentially monitoring the entire system." Danielle met his gaze unwavering. "If a system has never been monitored, how can we know it is not rotting?" Younger members of the meeting began nodding. A woman named Harriet, director of the Southern California region, said, "I support this. Our organization has been silent too long. We need to do something before everything collapses." Danielle continued, "We will also launch a hotline for customers to report mistreatment directly. I want anyone who has ever been wronged to have a place to speak." She paused for one exact beat, then delivered the line that electrified the entire meeting. "And I will personally review those reports every week." Shock rippled across the screens. A chief executive officer personally reading complaints. It was not just unusual, it was unheard of. But Danielle's resolve shut down any objections before they formed. "This is a risky strategy," someone finally said. Danielle looked directly into their window. "What is truly risky is allowing discrimination to continue in silence." No one responded. There was nothing left to argue. The meeting ended. The heavy silence gradually shifted into reluctant acceptance, then into the realization that a major restructuring had begun. Danielle left the room with a slow but steady breath. She knew the road ahead would be difficult. Men like Mark would always exist. Women like the one she once was would continue to face injustice. But at least today, she had laid a new foundation. Standing before the glass wall, watching Seattle glow under city lights, her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Ryan, "Miss Brooks. I just wanted to say, I'm proud to have chosen the right person to stand with." Danielle smiled a rare, warm smile in a day that had felt like a battle. She replied, "And I am proud you refuse to stay silent." The night wind swept through, carrying the chill of the approaching winter. But inside Danielle something was burning, bright, fierce, and unquenchable, because she knew that from now on every confrontation inside this system would no longer be hers alone. She had lit the fire, and the entire system had begun to glow, while Danielle Brooks sat in the topmost office of headquarters, facing a mountain of reform plans and non-stop calls on the other side of the city. Inside the small room behind the Sterling Seattle branch, the three men who once held the power of an entire machine were sinking into something close to psychological collapse. Mark Ellison sat on the floor with his back against a filing cabinet, his trembling hands gripping the fabric of his pants as if it were the last thing keeping him from falling apart. His phone buzzed non-stop, his wife asking what was happening, his lawyer urging an immediate meeting former colleagues, sending mixed messages of concern and ridicule. But Mark could not answer anyone because his mind was trapped in the moment. His computer screen went black and the blood-red words appeared. Access denied, corporate lockout. It was not just a message, it was a verdict, a final ending, a sealed fate. Eric Dalton stood a few steps away, one hand braced on the desk, the other clutching his forehead, gasping for air like someone who had sprinted a marathon. He had always thought he was clever enough to survive, clever enough to manipulate the system, clever enough to hide his misdeeds. But today, he realized his cleverness was nothing more than a childish trick when standing before someone like Danielle Brooks. Thomas Grant sat in the swivel chair at the center of the room, eyes vacant, staring into nothing. He was the only one of the three who had climbed to power by understanding exactly how the machine worked, knowing whom to please, whom to discard, whom to step on. But he had made one fatal mistake, daring to challenge the highest person in that machine, without knowing who she was. The image of Danielle standing before him, calm and sharp as a blade, exposing each of his failures, clung to his mind like a ghost. He let out a bitter laugh. She is the chief executive officer," Thomas whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it easier to accept. But it did not help. It only made him feel smaller. Outside the room, employees whispered to one another, their eyes flickering between fear and relief. Some were terrified after witnessing the three leaders stripped of power right before their eyes. Others were quietly relieved because they had long grown tired of enduring nonsensical orders and constant verbal abuse from the very people now being swept away like dust from a glass desk. But what happened inside that room was far darker. Mark slammed his hand on the floor, shouting, "This cannot end like this. I have worked here for 17 years. I have rights." Eric let out a twisted laugh. Rights. The right to insult customers. The right to humiliate people. The right to call the police because a woman did not dress the way you wanted. Mark snapped toward him, face red with anger, but eyes glinting with fear. "Who is she anyway? How are we supposed to know?" Thomas replied in a cold, hoarse voice. "Because we never paid attention. We thought we were above everyone." He smirked weakly. "But she stands far above us. She only needed one sentence and we were gone." The room fell into a suffocating silence. All three men understood there was no way back, no power left to cling to, no one left to defend them, no trick left to reverse the truth. At that moment, Thomas's phone rang. Not his wife. Not the bank. The Ethics Council of Sterling Holdings. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then answered with a trembling hand. "Mr. Grant," the voice on the other end was low, firm, and icy. "With the authority of internal investigators, you are required to appear at the regional headquarters within 24 hours to address severe violations in personnel management and discriminatory conduct. This is a mandatory summons." Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came out. His phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a cold, hard clack. Mark stared at him, face pale. No, this cannot be happening." Eric backed up a step, fingers digging into the desk. We are finished." And in that moment, they finally understood the truth they had refused to accept. Danielle had not simply fired them. She had activated the entire investigative apparatus behind her, where the real power lived. And once that system moved, No one, not even them, could escape. Meanwhile, at headquarters, Danielle received the summarized report on the three men's behavior. She read each line, her eyes turning colder. Former employees admitted that Mark routinely abused his authority. Eric enjoyed belittling anyone he deemed unfit, and Thomas overlooked every wrongdoing as long as it protected his position. The three of them were three perfect pieces of a rotten culture. Danielle set the report down and drew a deep breath. She did not hate them. She hated what they had done, and what they had done had dragged the bank into decay. The small legal meeting began immediately afterward. Miss Brooks, the head of legal, said given the severity of the misconduct, we recommend referring all three cases to labor investigators and the Financial Oversight Commission. Not only for discrimination, but also for ethical violations in management. Danielle nodded instantly. Do it. They must answer to the law, not just to the company. Her firm's statement was recorded in the minutes, then spread quickly throughout the internal system. Within an hour, every Sterling employee nationwide learned that the chief executive officer herself had ordered criminal investigations into the offending leaders. Shock rippled through the system, like aftershocks of an earthquake. No one dared judge customers by their appearance anymore. No one dared weaponize authority to humiliate others. No one dared assume the system would shield them forever. As for Mark, Eric, and Thomas, they sat there like three faded shadows, abandoned by time, pale and trembling each passing second, nothing more than the countdown to their inevitable reckoning. When night fell completely, the branch closed. Employees left, the lights dimmed one by one. Only the back room stayed faintly lit. Three silhouettes sat in the thick, suffocating silence. And across the city, Danielle stood at the window of the highest office, looking down at Seattle with unwavering eyes. She knew tomorrow would bring more battles. But that was the price required to tear apart the darkness inside the system she now led. She was not stepping away from the fight. She was stepping deeper into it. And for the first time, the system was beginning to tremble before the woman it once dismissed as unfit. Danielle Brooks, the woman they thought was nobody, had become the greatest reckoning they never saw coming. The next morning, before the first rays of sunlight pierced through Seattle's thin veil of mist, the headquarters of Brooks Financial Holdings was already glowing as if standing at the center of a historic overhaul. News of what happened at the Seattle branch was no longer an internal incident, but a national topic analyzed on financial broadcasts, social commentary programs, and even civil rights debate forums. No one could have imagined that an ordinary morning would become the shock wave that forced an entire banking system to confront itself. Danielle Brooks stepped into the central conference room where the senior leaders were already waiting. The atmosphere felt heavy, like a courtroom in session. Faces that once carried confidence and authority were now shadowed with worry and caution. They knew there was no longer any way to hide from the truth, that the era of covering up and looking away had ended the moment Danielle stood in the middle of the Seattle branch lobby and declared record everything. An older executive spoke first, his voice low and trembling. Miss Brooks, we reviewed everything, and we failed to recognize the depth of the rot in our system. Danielle looked at him, not with anger or blame, but with an unwavering seriousness. You did not fail because you did not see, she said. You failed because you believed that if you did not see it, it did not exist. The room fell silent. Her words were like a flashlight cutting straight into the corner where the system had hidden what it never wanted to face. Rachel entered with a thick stack of reports and set them in front of Danielle. "This is a list of 248 complaints from customers and employees over the past 4 years," she said, "all related to discrimination or abuse of authority." A ripple of shock swept across the room. 248, a director blurted out. How could the number be that high? Danielle answered immediately, because no one ever listened. Those numbers, those lines of testimony, drained the color from every face in the room. They had thought the Seattle incident was an outlier, but it was only the exposed tip of an ocean full of wounds the system had chosen to ignore. Danielle opened another file, her voice steady and clear. "This is the initial internal audit report. We discovered several branches hiding violations. The managers involved were suspended this morning." Another tremor ran through the room. Danielle continued, "I will personally visit 3 branches within the next 7 days. No announcements, no appointments. Anyone who does wrong will have no place here." Everyone understood that her words were not a threat. They were a promise. A regional director hesitantly asked, "Do you think we can turn this around?" Danielle did not answer immediately. She stood and walked to the large glass wall overlooking the city. Seattle beneath her looked like a vast map, each branch and each office a glowing point, and between those points were unquestionably still pockets of darkness. "We cannot repair the past," Danielle said, "but we can stop it from happening again." She turned back, eyes bright like fire, not the fire of anger, but the fire of resolve. "And we will do that no matter how difficult it is." No one objected. They knew they were standing before a woman who led not with her title but with the weight of everything she had endured and overcome. Across the city, Mark Ellison, Eric Dalton, and Thomas Grant sat in the waiting room of the regional headquarters awaiting their ethics hearing. None of them spoke. The cold white lights reflected off their pale faces, exposing the collapse of 3 men who had once stood at the peak of power. The footsteps of the investigation team echoed on the tiled floor like a countdown to judgment. A staff member opened the door. Voice firm, "Gentlemen, please come in." They stood though their legs felt rooted to the floor. No one was left to call for favors. No one was left to defend them. No one was left to blame. The door closed behind them, and with that sound, everything they once held ended. Meanwhile, for Danielle, Judgment Day was only beginning, but she felt no fear. She knew that to change a system, someone had to stand at the front lines, and today, that person was her Danielle Brooks, the woman who turned a moment of being underestimated into the spark that awakened an entire industry. As the afternoon tilted toward evening in Seattle, the final rays of sunlight streamed through the thick glass of Danielle Brooks's office, tinting the vast room in gold, while a decision quietly took shape. After the tense meeting with senior leadership, after reviewing the long list of uncovered violations, after hearing the cold click of the interrogation room door, where Mark, Eric, and Thomas were now facing real consequences, Danielle stood alone by the window, looking out over the city below. Light reflected across her face, outlining a woman who had walked through fire, no longer trembling, no longer doubting, only carrying a calm, unyielding resolve. Then her phone vibrated. A notification from the Ethics Council read "Hearing in progress." Multiple new pieces of evidence have surfaced. Involved individuals may face legal accountability. Danielle finished reading without joy or sorrow, only offering a small nod, an acknowledgement that justice, though slow, could move in the right direction when pushed by someone strong enough. Rachel entered, carrying a cup of hot tea, her face showing a mix of fatigue and admiration. Over 40 more branches have submitted workplace environment reports, she said. Some included personal apologies addressed to you. Danielle sipped the tea, the mint scent drifting softly through the room. Apologies are good, she replied, but action is what changes everything. Rachel gave a faint smile. And they are taking action because of you. Danielle did not argue. She simply tapped her fingers lightly on the glass desk, as if feeling the pulse of the entire system through the vibrations. A knock sounded at the door. It was Ryan Cole, the young security guard Danielle had chosen to promote. He stepped inside, standing upright, yet carrying the same sincerity he had the day before. "Miss Brooks," he said, "I came to thank you. Not just for the promotion, but because you made me believe I could do the right thing without being afraid of losing my job." Danielle looked at him. "Ryan, you were not kept because you were afraid. You were kept because you did what others would not." Ryan bowed his head, pride and emotion in his eyes. "If you need me for the upcoming branch inspections, I am ready." Danielle gave a small nod, as if tucking his promise into a quiet, meaningful corner of her mind. After Ryan left, Danielle returned to her desk and opened a new document titled Corporate Culture Reform Plan, version 1.0. A bold program not designed to patch holes, but to rebuild the foundation from the ground up. She typed the first line, "Power is not in giving orders. Power is in changing the things that make others stay silent." It was not a slogan. It was a truth written from blood and the bitter lessons she had lived through. Another message arrived, this time from Jamal. A link accompanied the note, "Miss Brooks, you need to see this." Danielle opened it. His video had surpassed 27 million views. Comments flooded in like a waterfall. "She is an icon. This is the chief executive officer we need. This is why I am switching banks. No one should ever be treated the way she was. No one should be judged by appearance." Danielle watched a few seconds, seeing herself standing in the lobby, hand resting on the counter eyes, calm as if nothing could touch her. But she knew the truth. She had not been fearless. She had simply lived with fear so long that it no longer controlled her. Rachel glanced at the screen, then at Danielle. "Do you want to release a public message? The media is waiting for an official statement." Danielle closed the video and set her phone down. "No," she said. "I do not want this story told by me. I want it told by them." Rachel understood instantly. Danielle was not fighting for herself. She fought for people like Jamal, the mother holding her child, the employees who had been crushed, the customers belittled, and for the version of herself from years ago, the young woman who once stood silently at a teller counter with pain in her eyes that no one cared to see. As dusk settled and the headquarters grew darker, Danielle's office remained bright. She packed her laptop, put on her coat, and stepped into the long hallway. Her footsteps on the stone floor echoed softly, steady and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of a system, slowly coming back to life. Before entering the elevator, she looked once more at the city of Seattle. The night lights reflected in her eyes like two steady flames. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we continue." And the elevator doors closed, carrying away the silhouette of the woman who transformed a moment of humiliation into the greatest reform movement in the company's history. Not just a chief executive officer. Not just a leader. Danielle Brooks, from this day forward, was the woman who taught the world that real power is not the shout of the mighty, but the calm voice of someone once dismissed who stands up and never sits down again. From the perspective of an expert in power dynamics, and organizational behavior, the story of Danielle Brooks reveals a timeless truth. Real power does not come from position, but from the ability to force an entire system to confront itself. Danielle did not prevail through shouting, she prevailed through unshakable dignity, in the face of prejudice, through a calm strength that turned humiliation into the fuel for reform. And instead of retaliating, she chose to repair the structures that had rotted long before she arrived. That is the mark of a progressive leader, someone who stands not only for herself, but for everyone who has ever been swallowed by silence. If this story resonates with you, tap like and subscribe to follow more journeys of powerful change like this. And before you leave the video, comment with the phrase, "Stand with confidence," to see how many people believe that self-respect and integrity can still redefine an entire system.